Hello and welcome to this short introductory video to Cozy Conspiracies. This is a personal project of mine, documenting my research into power structures and the elite, and hopefully eventually it's going to become a website with condensed information on the elite, but more on that later. As you can probably tell, the format's going to be quite casual, very sort of genuine. I'm very much going to just make this as cozy and doing it my way as much as I can, really. Um, so, without further ado, I'll just lay out kind of the project as a whole. So, there's going to be two types of videos on the YouTube channel. There'll be long videos where I kind of just record myself as I'm doing the research, so I'm constantly producing content. And sooner rather than later, that should become live streams, hopefully. Um, and I'll be essentially going through websites like this, maybe some YouTube videos, which focus on exposing or discussing certain uh, elements of power structures or their view on power structures, their kind of theorized conspiracies, which may or may not have happened. I'll be kind of reviewing the evidence, hopefully going to the primary sources where possible. And then, with all this information, what I'll be doing is I shall be putting it up onto a Word document like this to start. And as you can see, I've already started to do this a bit. And essentially, a lot of information is jumbled into this document, but eventually I plan on making a document for each person, each individual, and kind of laying out in chronological order different facts about them, kind of relevant facts to the idea of a elite and then hopefully I should be able to turn that into a PDF that or a maybe just a web page directly, and I'll use it to create a website which is not too dissimilar from Wikispooks. Now, if we go there, Wikispooks, you can see essentially, so they do different things, but one thing they do is they'll have sort of pages on individuals. Um, they do it in a more typical format of Wikipedia. I'll be doing it quite differently, but it'll kind of be in the same it kind of has the same idea or essence of this, right? But one problem I found when looking at conspiracy stuff in the past is it can get quite convoluted with the web and the interconnections. So what I'm hoping to do is make the website so you can kind of like easily just look at one person, look at where they were, when stuff happened in nice chronological order, you know, see within that timeline who they were speaking to when, and then also have a means by which you can kind of easily see what organizations they were a part of, who else they were connected to. So yeah, I plan on doing that by, like I said, having one document which is like a chronological order of what they've done, and that will be I believe a PDF on their page, because the reason why I think PDF's a good idea is it makes things, saved locally. It makes it very easy to spread. It makes it much harder to take down and censor. And people may not know this, but all you have to do is Control P, and you can essentially get a PDF of whatever page you're looking at. Now, that's very good to do if there's a web page that contains primary evidence, like for instance, off memory, I think maybe Planned Parenthood had some web page, or some organization that worked with Planned Parenthood had a web page where they discussed their history with like one of the Rockefellers funding them. They've since taken that down, but Luckily, someone saved that web page onto the Wayback Machine, but it would be better if people just had a PDF of it that was being shared around a lot, rather than this just having to rely on one source, the one central source, the Wayback Machine, to not take it down. Because the Internet Archive have been known to censor certain things in the past. Um, so yeah, um, that's sort of a very rough outline. And hopefully, I will also be able to, once I've condensed information into for the website, I'll also be able to make kind of more condensed, higher quality videos. Because whilst I think there's very good channels out there for research into the elite, Jay Dyer, um, Rotting Jewels, for instance. Um, Sometimes they're not always as succinct as they could be, which isn't a critique. It's not a bad thing, but it just shows that there's a potential gap there, like for people who just want the information kind of quickly and maybe presented in a less entertaining way. Um, but yeah. Um, Also, side notes, I will also be doing Cozy Philosophy as a paired sister project. It will share the same website and probably the same YouTube channel where I'll just be discussing my kind of my philosophy that I'm developing, my takes on things, and I'm working on many essays, many philosophy essays at the moment regarding that, but that takes a lot more thought and time, so that'll be much more that'll be a much slower project, let's say, with less uploads, less content updates than Cozy Conspiracies. Um, but that's sort of all the very, very basic information, the kind of overview. So turning back to the Word document, um, I'm going to essentially be sourcing with my own sourcing system, which I've created because I think the current one is kind of lacking and isn't necessarily the best. So, um, okay, so there's this idea that there's sources or can be credible or not. Now, I think this is a problem because I mean it's essentially a ad hominem. That has become a standard practice in research. I think really, if you're a good researcher, you should be able to realize that sometimes sources that often, you know, produce misinformation can be correct about something, and sources which are often correct about something can just be spewing misinformation at times. And in fact, a lot of what I think are people deem credible sources actually spew more misinformation than real information. It's just they have kind of power, money. They've kind of mastered propaganda techniques for so that the general public who haven't spent much time looking into these things to them it appears legitimate because it's much easier to kind of operate in the world in a very local pragmatic way if you just kind of adopt the view that there's some unquestionable authorities and I just because I don't want to put time and effort into having to go and do loads of research and think things through constantly. I'll just assume whatever they say is true as kind of my best guess, which is I certainly don't think that's a good idea, but I think it's completely understandable why people do that. But yes, so instead of looking at sources in terms of what's credible, what isn't, instead I'm going to be taking the view that anyone can claim anything, and you should really only analyze the contents of the claim rather than who's making it. But the one exception to that, of course, is that where it is logically relevant who's saying something or not is whether that person has access to the information they're claiming or not. Now, what I mean by that is if I claim an event happened but I'm not there, um, and I'm not citing evidence, no, that claim's going to be, let's say weaker, or you can ask like, well, how could I know that? Like epistemologically, it doesn't really make sense. Whereas if you had someone who was at an event and you can prove they were at an event, I don't know, there's CCTV footage or something, which could always be faked, of course, but when you're dealing with empirical evidence, you have to take things on like a probabilistic scale. You have to just think what's more likely, which will be influenced by your worldview and all, but at the end of the day, once you get into empirical evidence, you can never have certainty, and we can only really operate on our best guess, right? Um, but essentially, if someone was there at an event, or it's very likely they were there at an event at least, um, so as far as we're concerned, they were there, then they will have actually had the means of which to know things because they could have used their sense data whilst they were there, right? Um, so that kind of we kind of can say, well, their claim is that they have knowledge of it through their experience, right? Um, but the one problem with this, of course, is they could be mistaken, right, about what they saw. They could be malicious and lying about what they saw. Um, so just because someone's seen something or is in a position to experience something doesn't mean that it proves they did experience it or that their interpretation of what they experienced is correct necessarily, right? So I'm essentially, when I look at sourcing, I'm interested in this idea of privy, who is privy to what information. So if I was at an event and I'm claiming, something happened there, I'd be privy to that information because I was there. I could have experienced it and I could be recounting correctly, interpreting and recounting what I saw. Or I could be mistaken or I could be lying. There's no way to know for sure, but at the end of the day, you can still distinguish that from someone who doesn't have privy. They're not in a position of privy, just someone who wasn't at an event, just making, completely ad hoc, in other words, unjustified, unproven claims. Um, so yeah, so essentially, I'm going to be color coding things as grey if I don't really know what privy a person has. If something is just an assertion, so ad hoc claim, um, I will be using red, and that line through it just helps distinguish it from this red, which is if someone makes an assertion, right, and so they can't prove it, they can't prove that they have privy to it, but they can give like a reason for a lack of being able to prove it, then we'll use this. And if their reason given is verified, we'll use this. Because, I mean, for an example, there was a series of books like the Tavistock Institute and the Council of 300, written by, I believe, I can't think of his first name, I believe his second name was Coleman. And he claimed to be British intelligence, and he claimed that he has seen documents that stated certain things that are in his books, but he can't cite it because it's classified. And that may be true, that may not be true, but at least he gave a reason as to why he can't evidence his assertion. So I think it is worth distinguishing, but this whole red thing you can maybe take as something that probably wants further research to verify, right? Um, okay. Blue would be for if you have someone who's a witness, a direct witness to something, right? Highlighted if it's proven. And kind of lighter blue would be if they're discussing something that they did, because I mean, you know, I guess unless they're talking about like what they did when they were unconscious, which wouldn't count. We're talking about like conscious purposeful actions here that we're just assuming, or we hope that they remember. Well, there'd always be a witness to their own actions, so there's kind of a bit less uncertainty there. So light blue would be used, and finally, kind of golden, orangey brown um, would be if someone's like part of a group, like I don't know, part of a cult or something, and they're giving an account of what that group's done. We just distinguish that with orange, and we'll make it kind of lighter orange if a group uh, makes an official report about what they've done. So if a group, like I don't know, the UN releases an official report, that would be kind of different than just you know an individual's testimony, standalone testimony. Um, and so, what am I color coding exactly? So one potential problem with sourcing is it's nice and simple if someone just makes a claim, right? And then you just cite them as having said it. But what if someone's claim is about what someone else said? So, for example, when I was researching Andrija Puharich, I believe that there were newspaper articles where a journalist went and interviewed them, and then the journalist was the one to actually type up the outcomes of the interview. Of course, it wasn't called on video or anything. So I'm essentially looking at it and thinking, well, I'm taking the journalist's word that he did in fact interview Puharich, and Puharich did in fact say X, Y, and Z. So in a way, if you think about it, in a newspaper where someone's being quoted, really it's the journalist saying it, or but saying that this person said X, Y, and Z. So that creates a bit of a problem, especially because it could be an infinite regress. Like, for instance, you could say that, oh, person A could tell me that person B said, that person C said, that person D said, blah 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 blah, right? Um, but I mean, in practical reality, it's not going to be infinite. It's going to stop at one point, right? So I thought about it, and I think the best solution to this is to split sourcing into two. So if you have a what I call a source dead end, where there's like no more citations, because I mean it's quite common to read something and that see that a citation is included, then you go to that citation, and then maybe at that citation it may actually be citing something else. I did a neuroscience degree, and with a lot of reviews, I found that this was the case. Unfortunately, it was quite rare to like have a review and it just goes straight to a primary paper. Often reviews would cite reviews, right? So essentially, once you follow that, all the way down that rabbit warren, and get to the end, and there's no more citations. Well, we'll take the final place we arrive at as the source dead end, right? And this will be, I'll put an S next to text where you have a source dead end, right? So here's some examples. There's your gray. There's a red one, so that's a source dead end, and assertion. The person making it doesn't have privy to what he's saying. Um, maybe he does, but he hasn't indicated how he knows what he knows. Maybe he read it somewhere, but he hasn't indicated that at all. So, as far as we're concerned, he's just asserting it, right? Um, so that's the source dead end. A claim dead end would be, so back to the infinite regress, would be the last person claim. So if the person actually making the claim, so the source dead end is person A, and person A says, person B said that person C said, X, Y, Z. then person C is the last kind of claim source, um, and therefore we're be attributing, what the claim to them, um, and that person may or may not have privy to something, right? Now, it may not actually be true that person C said this, but this is why. We'll see if we can find an example of where we have a claimed and a claim dead end and a source dead end. Yeah, so here we have a kind of just a red, so an assertion, right? With no, the person making it has no privy to that information as far as I can see. He didn't cite a book didn't, or anything, but he's made a claim about what someone said, and that person would have had, I believe they would have been a primary witness, if I'm not mistaken, to these events, right? Or at least he would have, yeah, he would have had privy to these events happening. He could have been a primary witness to them. Um, so yeah, um, that is essentially the sourcing system. Oh, and just additionally, Um, now, with a lot of these, you'll see I've done these because when I was going through it before, I didn't actually go to the primary source. So if I haven't actually gone, so if a citation's done, um, particularly if it's something like, well, this person said this, and then there's a side, I don't know, a book page is cited or whatever, but I haven't actually gone to the book and checked it, then this would be here, right? Because people can lie about that, unfortunately. If a if something is cited, but I can't actually access the source at all, but there's like kind of evidence that, excuse me, there would have been a web page before containing that, then this symbol would be on either side of the text instead, so you get a little wiggly there and a little wiggly there. And finally, if a source is done, but I think it's likely fraudulent, then little star would be used, right? Um, Now, a lot of this you might notice. So we have a verified. Um, you know, the source is lost versus the source is made up. A lot of this is going to be what I think, right? Like it's going to be when I've looked at the probabilistic evidence, I've concluded this. Will I know for certain that's the case? No. So potentially, I think I'll think about perhaps adding some means to kind of where I discuss why I've chosen the color that I did, or why I've put source likely made up or source lost. I mean, yeah, there could be like some potential problems with that where well, I mean, for instance, we're here. If I verify someone as a primary witness, well, often in doing that, I'd be having to cite other things that prove that person was a primary witness. But then those citations themselves would be prone to the system, right? So they would then have to be kind of justified their color system. If I were to be consistent or apply this sourcing system in a meta way. So I'll think about that one. But for now, I feel that this would be a pretty solid system that communicates a lot about kind of, like just looking at this, you can see here it's like, oh, weaker claim. Here, that's probably a stronger claim, right? Um, because you have this here. You can, sure, I haven't gone and actually verified it myself because of these, you can see, but once these are away particularly, well, that's going to be a much stronger. That's going to be a much stronger claim. Um, so that's kind of the sourcing system explained. So finally, just to give a kind of bit of background, to make it easier for people going into the following videos, particularly if you're kind of new to the world of conspiracies, or what I just really call the conspiracy view of history. I don't think there's anything wrong or controversial about thinking that history is driven by kind of crafty individuals, let's say, rather than by just chaos or people collectively just doing their own thing and that happening to lead to certain effects. I mean, there's probably an element of both in reality, but I just think that the element of conspiracy is very much under represented, kind of played down. I mean, it's like conspiracy theorists is literally used kind of as a thought terminating cliche, you know? Um, but anyway, that's kind of a topic for another video. But just to lay out kind of a very, very simple overview of kind of where I'm coming from when I look at history from a conspiracy perspective. So I'm only focusing on modern history, kind of the last 200 years, give or take, kind of like late 19th century onwards, right? I'm sure that there's been influence which has occurred uh, kind of long before that, which has carried through to the modern day. Which I mentioned, I mean, one that I think is relevant is the British East India Company, which is where kind of the early British Empire was actually largely built kind of by private mercantile companies rather than the crown and the state officially. And that's when I believe you kind of really saw a shift from power being more over, like king infighting and kingdoms fighting each other, and that's what you always had, like you know power being in like the oligarchy and blah blah blah. But I think where you rarely start to see like shadow power in the West. I mean, I know you've had it in I think like Japan for ages, but where you rarely saw it in the West was in yeah, the power shifting from the mercantile to the mercantile corporations, because kingdoms became pretty reliant upon them to kind of do well, right? And a lot of just like colonization, let's say, in the British Empire was pretty much in the early days before it went really really bad, and the Queen, um, I believe, had to interfere, was done by British mercantile corporations like the British East India Company, and that kind of created like almost a elite within that. Um, and kind of coming out of that background, let's say, you had a man called Cecil Rhodes, right? And he's known for setting up Rhodesia, which became Zimbabwe, I believe. And essentially, he he had this view that the British Empire had to expand over the entire world, right? Like English kind of common law and culture had to take over everything. In fact, I mean, I think it was a bit of a not to be cliche, but I think it was a bit of a white supremacist, like I think he very much kind of did believe in like the superiority of the, Anglo, maybe Anglo-Saxon race. We'll come to all that, but essentially, he set up this thing called the Round Table Group, which was, basically a secret society. And people are like, well, if it's so secret, how do we know about it? Well, secret societies really just mean something a society where the kind of what happens there and what they discuss and yada yada tends to try and be kept in the group. Um, they essentially operate kind of like intelligence agencies. I mean, intelligence agencies are pretty much secret societies when you really think about it, except they're kind of, officially anyway, beholden to the government, where secret societies are just beholden to themselves, right? Um, but yeah, so he came up with a secret society, and the idea was to slowly accumulate wealth to kind of take over the world. And that influenced a lot of kind of what happened with British colonialism, and it sort of led to the Second World War, and like some of the members were involved in that. Um, but kind of more important than him, I'd say, out of him and his will when he died, because he left all of his money to kind of building this his building this kind of global British empire and bringing America back under the control of the British, was Lord Milner. Um, and I mean, this is very official history. Actually, you can go and look up like Milner's kindergarten on Wikipedia. He basically hired a bunch of like, he took a bunch of like students from Oxford, and brought them over to kind of like try and run some of the British colonies and whatnot. And at the time, you started to kind of see an alliance forming between the Fabian socialists, who were kind of Britain's main socialists. They had a big role in setting up the Labour Party, and the kind of Round Table group, who were very much controlling the Conservative Party, and then I think the Liberal Party at one point, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, they kind of formed an alliance. Now, Fabian socialists are very like pro eugenics, very central control. Some of them, like H.G. Wells, thought that secret societies of the elite should rule the world. He said it quite openly in some of his books. And I mean, H.G. Wells, I think, is kind of one of the main sources of how we know a lot about, the Fabians' kind of interactions with the Round Table group. Like, I think it was in uh, like Adventures in Autobiography or something. He wrote about like at the Coefficients Club how the Fabians would hang out with the Round Table group, and he wrote books like The Open Conspiracy about how blatant their conspiracy was. But again, that's kind of besides the point. But because of the powerful positions of this group of people, they kind of managed to stoke tensions and influence. I think like Edward VII, is it, if I'm not mistaken? I believe he was kind of on board with them, and he got involved in a bunch of geopolitical stuff, which helped kind of stoke the tensions for World War One. So they kind of, again, there's many factors at play, but they largely influenced and uh, some would argue created World War One, which was just disastrous, and they used um, Colonel Ed, Colonel Mandel Edward House, who was kind of the handler who controlled Woodrow Wilson, the president of America at the time. He was very on board with the Round Table and the Fabians, and he got Woodrow Wilson to trick America into entering the war, right? And that was part of the making America like part of the British Empire again, or at least bringing them together to become like partners again, right? So after World War One, you had the Paris Peace Conference in like 1919, and that is where kind of the infrastructure, the elites, the global power we have right now kind of originated. So out of that, the Council on Foreign Relations in America, or the Royal Institute for International Affairs in Britain was created, and that's kind of like the bigger circle that the roundtable groups in the respective countries control, right? Um, and that's kind of one means by which they influence the policies of the country. Again, this is essentially called the Anglo-American establishment, and by now, um, they were already buddy buddy with like the robber barons in America, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgan and Vanderbilts and all those lot, you know, Ford, Ford Foundation. Um, anyway, so kind of um, So the Soviet Union was funded, you know, largely by kind of Wall Street and these powers, with kind of the Marxist project largely being popularized by Fabianism and somewhat coming out of London. I mean, you know, there's a lot to be argued there. I understand that the factions of the left are a lot more nuanced than that, but again, this is very grand narrative oversimplification here. And the American elite, you know, and again the British did it too. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, like this kind of circle as a whole, um, then kind of funded, you know, like the fascist nations, like you know Franco, Mussolini, Hitler, um, and yeah, created kind. I think my take is they were trying to create a free will power block of like kind of weird liberal, you know, kind of Fabian liberalism, a weird mix of like authoritarianism and like Western values. You know, fascist kind of the fascist Nazi bloc and the Bolshevik bloc. Um, Kind of because you had some very influential members of the group, like Lionel Curtis, who had this plan, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, this guy who a lot of this information comes from Tragedy and Hope, which was written by Carol Quigley, and he claims something to that effect. Like, he didn't like that people thought his book was about people trying to take over the world, and instead he thought it was more discussing British geopolitical, like complex British geopolitical strategy, right? So my take is at the time they believed in a free will power block structure, not unlike what was described in kind of 1984 by George Orwell. Um, and again, I'll be covering all the evidence of this in sort of individual videos. This is just a very simple video. Um, and the other thing that came out of World War One is, of course, the League of Nations, but that one, which could be seen as their attempt at like creating a international kind of supranationalist power to kind of control this balance, but it didn't work. I mean, I think America particularly kind of rejected the League of Nations. So you end up with World War Two now. Whether that one was also like stoked on purpose or if it was just that their power block plan broke down. Again, it's arguable. I think that there's a lot of evidence for, you know, both things being the case maybe, but um out of World War Two, we had the League of Nations became the UN, which is much more successful. Though people still think it's a bit of a joke, and I completely understand why. But it's certainly been accepted by nations a lot more than the League of Nations were, as far as I'm aware. And of course, you also had like wartime est uh, agencies like the Office for Strategic Services, the OSS, you know, which worked alongside MI6 in Rockefeller Center. They became the CIA, even though America was never meant to have a peacetime intelligence agency. It was passed, and that's become the, you know, intelligence community, the big bloated intelligence community in America now. Um, Again, kind of another example of America becoming a lot more like the UK in a sense, really. But yeah, so the establishment of the CIA was a pretty big thing. That pretty much almost took over American foreign policy with you know, I'm sure people have heard of like banana republics, and so you had like Operation Ajax where they worked with British intelligence to give more power to that. I think at the time, the Anglo-Iranian oil company, which is BP now, was in that, you know, that country, and the president at the time tried to nationalize it. So British intelligence and the CIA assassinated him, and then the CIA, you know, for United Fruits Company, went and pretty much did a coup in Guatemala, and kind of all the things that people typically think of the CIA doing, you know, which is why leftists would kind of just think they're like, oh, fascists serving the corporations. and whatnot. I think that's a very reductionistic view of what they do, but it's certainly part of what they do, right? Um, and yeah, now, meant in line with what I just said, a lot of this might seem kind of strange to think that is this really the power structure? Particularly to right wingers, because this is certainly how I felt when I started looking at things. Maybe apart from kind of Trump and Peter Thiel and all that coming to power recently, or they kind of crept into power in the background. Or the network behind Trump has crept into power, but Trump himself is obviously very loud. But until recently, I would argue that the left, um, not all the left, not every faction of the left, but certain factions of the left have pretty much kind of dominated Western society. We've had what people would call wokeism, let's say, kind of well, we say progressivism, but I mean progressivism was more like Fabian eugenics and pretty much proto-Nazism when it was founded as a movement. So again, a lot of terms are kind of meaningless, really, or their meaning changes to just be suit political needs rather than actually being kind of termed in a more intellectual way, let's say. But essentially, the new left, let's say, who are very anti-Western civilization, very, they pretty much their whole thing is just like attacking straight white males because of intersectionality and all that, right? That's certainly been in power, um, and that's probably because of what started as officially. I don't think that it actually was because what started as denazification effort, so called, right? Where we need to, you had the cultural Marxists, the Frankfurt School come up with this study, the authoritarian personality, where they say that caring about family, caring about religion, and all that makes you bigoted, and it makes you more likely to be a fascist, right? Um, Bear in mind that whilst they were doing all this denazification stuff, and the Frankfurt School were working for the OSS, at least some of them were, like Herbert Marcuse, I believe. Um, the OSS at the same time were working on, smuggling Nazis via rat lines, into America and South America, to help them with Operation Gladio, where they created global neo-fascist terror networks. So, very, like playing both quote unquote sides, very hypocritical. But essentially, yeah, the new leftism became this thing which I believe its entire purpose is to basically, well, A, promote dysgenic population control through promoting things that stop people breeding. Um, and I believe Julian Huxley discusses it in UNESCO as philosophy and purpose. Um, and you have like the Planned Parenthood Jaffe memo and all, but that's besides the point. The other thing is, I think they kind of shifted from their free will power block plan to a more what we just need is international order. We just need to get rid of all like cultural identity, yeah, all nationalism basically. So they work to basically try and make leftism equal, being a nice progressive human. And the way to do that is to just be anti-national in every way, be anti-nationalist in every way. The current thing is white culture or whiteness or whatever. Then to be progressive, you got to attack whiteness. You got to just help kind of yeah replace any sense of kind of national pride. So like whilst they continue to kind of whilst the intelligence agencies continue to exploit and pillage and destroy third world countries, then all the migrants who are created from that are kind of have flee their country, come here where right now the native, white population are being heavily hit with anti-natalist propaganda, so they're not breeding and they're starting to go extinct, right? But then, um, and just for clarity, I'm not like or ethno-nationalists or white supremacists by any stretch of the imagination, because I think one reason why they are bringing, why there is a push for mass immigration into the West is to subvert uh, other cultures so that other races also go extinct, because the end goal is appears to be transhumanism, right? We want to use technology to get rid of human biology and change what it means to be human. But again, that's a whole other topic. So that's kind of like one arm. I mean, after World War II, there was obviously the Cold War, and that was used to create this kind of Cold War dialectic of Western liberalism and capitalism versus you know Sovietism, which was perhaps most strongly embodied by like Reagan, for instance. And that created neoliberalism, right, for like the Rand Corporation, and that's kind of in America, at least. I'd say in the UK, I don't think Americans necessarily understand. In the UK, libertarianism doesn't really have any representation. I wouldn't say, not much at all, if any. But in America, libertarianism has a bit more, and conservatism has a bit more, but like maybe not like strongly traditional conservatism. But that kind of replaced the old right, as a way of trying to essentially almost rebrand neoconservatism, because neocons, if you don't know, are essentially Trotskyites who ex-Trotskyites who got persecuted and kicked out of the Soviet Union. So their entire thing now is just like anything. All that matters is back then. All that matters is attacking the Soviet Union. They're still very anti like Russia, and that doesn't mean Russia's a good place. It isn't, but um, the point is they're very like imperialistic because they see America as the means of which to like destroy all of that basically. Um, so whenever you think of like rabid, anti-commie, conservative kind of people, it's normally neocons, right? And they're normally the ones who are like pro, they were for the Iraq War and all that. Um, so they're kind of another arm of power which hasn't quite gone away, So yeah, there's complexity there, but I think that basically those sides work together, like I explained. I think the foreign the new left is the domestic policy. Not that there isn't some foreign policy there. I mean, you do see them like subverting other countries with kind of woke propaganda, let's say, but it's mostly domestic. Whereas the foreign policy is mostly kind of neocon. Oh, let's just go in and bomb them, and we'll do the economic hitman thing of like building infrastructure for them, with them getting into lots of debt, and then the infrastructure's not even built to last, so it breaks down, and just all sorts of scummy kind of tactics. And then the left say, well, um, yeah, look at what you've done. Look at what white people have done historically, and look at what's happening now. Blah blah blah. Therefore, you have to accept mass migration and the destruction of your culture. But the thing is, it's like it's not the American people, it's not the British people doing these things. It's the kind of British and American elite who steal resources and freedom from the British and American people, and then use it to destroy other countries, and then use that as an excuse to try to force the other country's culture, domestically, to undermine that and destroy the white people first, but you know, eventually to then subvert the other cultures who come here with Western materialism and antinatalism. that'll lead to them becoming undermined as well. So that's kind of my sort of very grand narrative. I think there's a hell of a lot more nuance than that, obviously, but yeah, um, I suppose that's kind of the overview. Apart from that, there's maybe just kind of a few other things to consider, like other players, let's say. So wow, there's where to start? So there's well, recently, I guess it's quite relevant now because a lot of Trump's people are going there. There's the Bilderberg meetings, right, which are like kind of elite international private meetings, right? And part of that crowd is like the World Economic Forum, kind of globalist. That's very pretty mainstream now. Like most people know about that. And part of that, of course, would just be globalist organizations like the EU. Um, of course, there'll be the rich families doing all with each member doing kind of their little subversive things, and they have foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, Carnegie Endowment for Peace or something, to kind of carry out their subversions, which they were doing a lot during the Cold War, by the way. They were actually pushing pro-leftist, pro-communist kind of propaganda during that time. Um, then there's kind of like the color revolution side of things, which is what the initial CIA foreign coup apparatus kind of became. So a lot more of it's become private now. So, you might have heard of George Soros. He was involved in this, and you have the what is it? The International Endowment for Democracy, I believe. And they kind of go into foreign countries, particularly ex-Warsaw Pact countries, and um, kind of through technologies like as developed through Gene Sharp, for instance. You can go and read about this, and he based this off a lot of Gandhi's techniques. He can kind of top down create like political movements and coups whilst making it look grassroots. Um, and yeah, they've used that to overthrow a lot of ex-Warsaw Pact countries, which has increasingly choked Russia, which has kind of led to the messy Russian-Ukraine situation at the moment. Because of course you had I think the Maidan coup in 2014, which was again a color revolution. So that's another element. And again, a lot of this it doesn't mean I'm pro-Russia. I, I'm not pro-Russia or pro-Ukraine. I don't particularly like either, to be honest. But again, I could get more into that in another video. But then there's like the Vatican. They've been around for kind of forever, Well, not literally, but they were in a way. Some people argue like the first corporation, and they actually do have a kind of subversive unit or arm, let's say. They're the Jesuits, right? Jesuits will kind of go into foreign countries and often take up university positions like this Jesuit universities. Excuse me, and they you know subvert people there. Like they've been involved in a lot of creating a lot of the newer Bible editions, and I believe that some of them were involved in the kind of like civil rights movement. Like maybe some of them even worked with like Martin Luther King, if I'm not mistaken. But again, like Martin Luther King, I agree with the message in the speech. I have a dream, but a lot of people don't know that. Unfortunately, he was surrounded by a lot of communists, many of who increasingly actually made him take on a like racialist worldview, which I would argue is very much in kind of opposition to his message. But then again, other people argue that the anti-racialism in that message is kind of communist, but I would agree with that. But there's debates to be had there. And yeah, there's obviously going to be kind of secret societies. So Freemasons, most notably, they've been around for a long time and they're kind of established everywhere. And in fact, they're often sort of used by other secret societies. So Jesuits, for instance, subverted the Masons, if I recall, and they kind of used Masons as like their lower order, and then they just like formed the top. The Illuminati, which was a secret society around during the French Revolution, or I think it slightly preceded the French Revolution, but set up by Adam Weishaupt. They did the same thing. They competed with the Jesuits, and kind of subverted Masonic lodges to form so they used the Masonic levels, let's say the Masonic ranks, um, degrees rather, as like the lower ranking for their secret society, and then they had their little Illuminati secret society on top. And I mean, it happens even today. You had like the well, in recent history, you had the P2 Masonic lodges as part of Operation Gladiator, where they had kind of where they were setting up secret fascist networks. They used the P2 Masonic lodges for lower ranks, and they had their kind of higher fascist secret society at the top of that, right? So yeah, and there's loads of secret societies, and they're all kind of interconnected. There's like the Rosicrucians, there's Knights Templar, there's you know, uh, what do you call them? There's the Thelema, which was kind of came out of the OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis, but that's more 20th century, if I'm not mistaken. You have the Theosophy, that's a big one. And tied to that is, of course, Satanism, right? People, of course, will probably roll their eyes at this one, but I think there's a good amount of evidence of kind of high up people practicing kind of Satanism as put forward by, like Aleister Crowley and Nietzsche. Um, a sort of will to power, love under will, like worldview. Um, and I mean, love under will means passion, so go and strive to take what you want, but do it in a way where like you're in control, like almost like wield your passions to get your will rather than letting your passions control you. But it's still a very just will to power, like my way or the highway kind of worldview. And yeah, I know I'll be covering Satanism a lot. Um, and then there's again, there's sort of ideologies or areas of study like cybernetics and transhumanism, which form a big part of the elites' kind of motivation and can act as a stronghold for them. Essentially, like if you see like a company being involved in cybernetics, for instance, that would normally mean it may contain someone who it may be ran by someone who is kind of in the know or high up in the power structure. Not necessarily, but that may be the case. Um, I'm sure there's plenty of others because there's also many kind of smaller secret societies that serve as kind of shorter term, but yeah, that are used for shorter term things, but are important. Like I think like there's like the Safari Club or something that like George Bush was part of, if I recall. Um, there's countless amount really, but apart from that, I think that's a kind of a pretty good sort of general overview. And everything else is probably best left for more like individual videos. But yeah, that'll be kind of that's a rough outline of the worldview I take. Just full disclaimer for like clarity's sake, I consider myself to be a sort of mix between conservative and libertarian. I'm right wing. I don't hold to classical liberalism and markets as a good thing, but I do hold to like voluntarism um, and I'm not against markets entirely. I just don't think that they should be what governs all human interactions and behavior. I place a lot of value on family and local community, and rather than like an objectivist kind of selfish take, I believe in that people do owe like a duty to each other, but I don't believe in like a global duty. I don't think everyone has to help everyone. Otherwise, I mean, the logical conclusion of that would be that unless you're constantly going around trying to, you know, stop the just millions and millions of instances of evil in the world right now, then you would just be, being a hypocrite basically if you're um, someone who thinks that, oh, something's wrong, people have a duty to instantly go and correct it. But yeah, I'd explain more about that in Cozy Philosophy. But yeah, I hope the video's been informative and hopefully nice and chill. And I shall be kind of covering this page that's right in front of me, going through each thing, um, adding to this document here. And yeah, that should be it.